All right, everyone, welcome in. It's a good time each and every week here on College Football Coast to Coast with Pigskin, Pete, and myself. This is where you can find us every Monday at noon Eastern time. So lock it on in. Monday at noon Eastern time, of course, talking up college football, and this is just about the best time of year. Pigskin Pete, how you doing?
I'm amazing and fantastic, Mark. Thank you for asking.
There it is. There it is. We would expect no less. Dabo Swinney typically doing amazing and fantastic himself, and I'm usually on his side in these little debates. If not on his side, at least understanding, hey, it's America. He can say whatever's on his mind. Now we've got a back and forth between Dabo and other coaches. Let's just pin him down. Jimbo Fisher has made some comments and other coaches about the Big Ten in particular. I don't think they're necessarily talking about the Pac-12 because USC's chances are pretty minimal. What about teams playing 5 and 6 games? And it's going to be 6 games once the Buckeyes play the Big Ten championship game, being given as much, let's say, credit for a full college football season in consideration for the college football playoff as teams that are playing 10 and 11 games in the SEC and the ACC. And we'll throw in the Big 12, even though their teams have lost 2 games. They did play 10 and 11 games. So let's start that side of the debate in regards to what Dabo has said, what others have said about the Big Ten and the Pac-12 only playing 6 games.
Well, I think essentially what he said is what everyone's been saying since the beginning of the Big Ten season is if they have a couple of games canceled, do they deserve to be in the playoffs only playing 6 games or so? And he basically said, or not basically said, he literally said, if I was on the playoff committee, I would have a hard time leaving out a team that's played 9 or 10 games like Texas A&M, like Florida. Now, this is before Florida lost as badly as they did this past weekend. But he's basically saying it's not fair to have a team that's played half the amount of games as another one be considered over them. And so I think a lot of people felt that way. He said it. Of course, Dabo Swinney does not have a filter. There's a lot of people that agree with him.
Yeah, so I don't have an issue with that. Number one, him speaking his mind, and I've never had an issue with that. Sometimes I also say, well, I should have my opinion and my right to respond to what he has said because I don't think it necessarily makes sense, and that's been at times in the past. But why is there an issue or a controversy in saying we're going to have a different evaluation of a team that played 6 games versus the team that played 10 or 11 games? That only makes sense. You have less chances to lose. Your resume is not as good. It can't be as good, or it has to be more outstanding in those 6 games than a team that played 10 or 11 games. Well, if you want to continue down that path,
Florida is a prime example.
5 or 6 games, then you would be defending maybe 2 or 3 games. You could take that to all sorts of degrees.
Well, Florida is a prime example of this. Right, Florida was sitting there in the driver's seat to possibly win this weekend, which we know now is not probably going to happen. But had they not played that LSU game, they wouldn't have an extra loss on their schedule. So playing more games definitely matters. And what Vinay Prasad here says in the chat is something that's being echoed all over places like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. He says Dabo is terrified of playing us Buckeyes. Now, does anybody really believe that, or is this just a bad troll job? I can't tell. You tell me, Mark.
Vinay, come on. Vinay's been jumping on here just in the last few weeks, so we appreciate him jumping on and commenting a lot, Vinay. I assume you're a Buckeyes fan. I don't think that any credible football coach is afraid of playing anyone. I think that once you've reached the Dabo Swinney range, number one, you want to take on the best. Sure, you would love to see, and there's nothing wrong with this, also thinking, hey, if we can get that 1 seed, then we play the 4, and I want the easier path. Nothing wrong with that. But I don't think these guys are afraid of anyone, number one. Number two, look at the track record. Look at what's happened in the past. I don't think Dabo Swinney's afraid of playing Ohio State. Do I think he respects their talent? Yeah. Do I think he's afraid in any possible way? No.
No. No. I'll just leave it at that. I can't even believe that people say that sort of thing and believe it.
Do college football coaches have certain evaluations after watching the tape on their team versus watching the tape on another team? Was Dabo extremely confident, as you well know, in 2016 before playing Ohio State, thinking this is a good team, but I can see where we can really expose this team. And if we play a decent game, we should beat them. Yeah, he came out and said that.
Right.
And it proved.
And so the Sweeney comments bring up a whole nother point. It's a philosophical debate. In other words, do you think that the best 4 teams or the most deserving teams? And this is where all this always boils down to. So in other words, what Dabo is saying is a team that's only played 6 games doesn't deserve to be in the playoffs, not necessarily saying they're not one of the 4 best teams. And this is where when I do my own rankings, I have this, debate with myself, which is more important, the team that deserves it more or the team that's better. And I sort of I cut it right down the middle. I'll take both of those things into consideration when I make my rankings. The playoff committee, though, is not supposed to be doing that. They are supposed to be putting the 4 best teams in. So how do you evaluate the 4 best teams? It's virtually impossible in today's college football landscape. I have Ohio State in my top 4. And if they win this weekend against Northwestern, they will remain in my top 4. So I hope that Ohio State does get into the playoffs. And I would like to see a game between Clemson and Ohio State in the first round. That's what I would like to see.
I tend to favor the resume side of it, but I certainly respect the evaluation of the talent and the evaluation of the play on the field. And I evaluate the play on the field. But to my point, Ohio State only played a few games. When they first, meaning the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, ranked the teams, boom, Ohio State, number 4, at, I think, 3-0 at the time. I had them around 15 or 16 at the time because they didn't have the body of work, for my estimation. Now, had they played 3 excellent teams and beat them all like a drum, then that would have been a different evaluation, but they didn't play anybody good to that point, and therefore I had them down the rankings.
Yeah, I'm with you. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. With Florida losing, that opens up the door. I mean, some other things still have to happen, obviously, but there you have Cincinnati sitting there. You have Texas A&M sitting there. We'll see what the rankings look like when they come out tomorrow night. As for who's going to be sitting at that 6th spot. Will Cincinnati move up to 6? Will they give Indiana some love? There's a lot of different scenarios that can play out.
I think it's time to give Indiana a little bit of love.
Yes, I agree. I have them in my top 10. So that video will be coming out later this afternoon. Everybody can check that out. But spoiler alert, I have them in my top 10.
I've got Indiana at 7. Spoiler alert, if you want to check out my top 25.
Funny. I think that's where I have them too.
Because think about this, Pigskin. I had a really good caller call the other night. He calls all the time. He's really smart, logical, but we had a bit of a difference of opinion. And I think I swayed him over because he had an issue with where I had Iowa State ranked, and he was defending their number 7 position. Once we started to compare Indiana and Iowa State, I started to get him to see where the Big 12 was just being ranked a lot. And that's another portion of this. When the College Football Playoff Committee or anybody defends, okay, well, I've got this team, they've beaten this many ranked teams. Well, sometimes those rankings are based merely on your opinion. Therefore, you've ranked the teams. Therefore, of course, you're not ranking teams that are 3 and 5. So they've earned it to a degree, but look at Missouri. Missouri was ranked last week by the committee. Well, they're not going to be ranked this week because they just got annihilated by 5 touchdowns. So is that a quality win or not a quality win? Because some people just look at the rankings and say quality win or not quality win.
Well, we know that they don't really have any standards. It's always just who they think is better. It's always that way. Otherwise, if you're going off of resume, Ohio State would have never been ranked ahead of Texas A&M. Texas A&M might have out of all the top 10 teams, has the strongest strength of schedule and strongest strength of record. Now, of course, they have a blowout loss basically to Alabama. But if you're going off of resume, Texas A&M should be at 4. So they're clearly saying, we understand that Texas A&M is a good team. They've played more games, but we think Ohio State's better. And I agree.
So basically, the conversation with Iowa State and Indiana last week that I had was the committee had Indiana at 12, Iowa State at 7. If you start with a record, Indiana 6-1, Iowa State 7-2, maybe 8-2 with a non-conference win. I don't remember 7-2 or 8-2 versus 6-1. That's kind of apples to oranges. It's not the same number of games. Indiana's got a better winning percentage at 6-1. Iowa State's played a few more games. They're 8-2 or 7-2. So that's about even. But Iowa State's wins look better because all those teams have been ranked. Now, have they earned the ranking? Sure. They've got decent records. They've earned the ranking. But once we put it all together, I said, add up Iowa State's Big 12 schedule, add up Indiana's Big 10 schedule, and both schedules added up to 5 games under 500. So I said, basically, they played the same schedule in terms of the only way you can evaluate it, and that's within the league because there's no non-conference games. So for some reason, they latched on to Iowa State at some point and really thought that they had delivered a strong season, which they're good. No, I'm not dissing Iowa State.
Of course,
I just think they're a little heavy.
We get to see, a rematch between them and Oklahoma. That'll be interesting too. And we'll see where the ranking, the playoff committee puts both of those teams in the rankings this week. We know they thought very highly of Iowa State last week. They had them at 7, right? What will they do with Oklahoma at this point in the rankings? Are they going to set it up, basically, for lack of a better term, for them to possibly move their way, one of those two teams into the top 4? We'll see.
So based on our recent conversations, I believe that you think that there are 4 teams that are, forget the number of games played, that you think there are 4 teams that have separated themselves and you believe are the best teams.
I do.
Okay. I tend to believe the same thing based on what I've seen thus far this season. We'll see if anything this weekend changes my mind. But if I was just going to reward on best teams, I think it's Alabama, clearly the best, and then some fashion of Notre Dame, Clemson, and Ohio State. Now, if I was going to rank them, which I do, I put Ohio State in the 4th spot because they haven't played the number of games as the other two, and I understand I get hit with the undefeated record versus Clemson has lost a game, but that loss was to the number 2 team in the country on the road without 3 defensive starters and the best quarterback in the country.
Yeah, and let's fast forward here to this weekend. Do I think that Clemson is one of the 4 best teams in the country, regardless of what happens this weekend? Yes. However, if they lose twice in one season to Notre Dame, Clemson does not belong in the playoffs, and I don't want them there, quite frankly. But there'll be people that make a case for them, and I understand making a case for it. But again, wins and losses have to matter, no matter how good the team is.
And that's where you get caught between the choosing the 4 best and the 4 most deserving. Because let's say Clemson goes out and plays the type game that still makes you believe they're one of the 4 best, or any reasonable college football fan. They play a 38-37 game. Notre Dame beats them by 1 point. We're still sitting here thinking that's one of the 4 best teams in the country. Right. But they get 2 losses now.
And that's part of the other. This is the other part of the Dabo Swinney comments that rub people the wrong way. Is they're saying he's basically setting himself up for a Clemson loss and still vying for a playoff spot, even with 2 losses, because they played more games. Maybe that's what he's doing. I don't know. Maybe he's speaking to his players through the media. I don't know. It's just it seems to be Dabo Swinney will answer anything that you ask him, even if he probably shouldn't, and he'll give you his honest opinion. But personally, again, I don't believe if Clemson loses this weekend that they should be in the playoffs, but there will be people that think that they should.
So the first 2 items that most people check off the list are record and conference championship, and then we dive deeper into the schedule and the quality of the wins. Well, USC, if they win this weekend, is going to have the same resume to start out, at least, as Ohio State, 6-0 conference championship. Do you see a path for them?
Ooh, it's a long path, Mark. You would probably need Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State to all lose, or at least Clemson and Ohio State at minimum.
So let's say that happens. Buckeyes lose, Clemson Tigers lose. So we've got Notre Dame, Alabama, slam dunks into the playoffs, and then we've got 2 other spots to deal with, and maybe that's a Northwestern.
Well, that would be one hell of a jump from where they're ranked now. That means you're talking about moving up 10 spots or something along those lines. What were they ranked last week? Well, and we'll see
14,
what they're ranked.
I believe.
Huh?
I believe 14.
Yeah. So I mean, you're 10 spots.
But my goodness, you're the Big Ten champion. You're 7-1. You beat Ohio State.
That's why I think the rankings that come out tomorrow night are going to be. We're going to see where these teams are well positioned. We've never seen a team move from 10 to 4 to get in the playoffs before. I mean, that's a massive jump. In that scenario, though, if we go back to the Clemson losing and Ohio State losing, I think A&M definitely gets in as long as they take care of business this weekend against Tennessee. That fourth spot, man, it's open. It's open to an Iowa State. It's open to an Oklahoma. It's open to a USC, like you said, and that'll be one heck of a debate if those two things happen.
Yeah, it will be a heck of a debate. And besides being a Buckeyes fan that, of course, wants to see them win and get in the playoffs, I would love to see the chaos of what could ensue with Cincinnati getting consideration and Texas A&M and USC. Absolutely. Yeah, you know that the playoff committee isn't just, they say that they reconstruct the entire rankings every week and say, okay, we just clean the slate, then we reconstruct it from start to finish. But you know that they're playing, hopefully, for their sake, playing chess rather than checkers and thinking, like in a Northwestern situation, we better do something here if we believe that they're going to make a case for themselves if they beat Ohio State as a 20-point underdog.
Yeah, and then they have to cover their own, too, Mark. If they had somebody ranked at a certain spot last week, it's hard for them to say that they were that wrong, that they're going to drop them 20 spots. If they're reevaluating every week, that would be the case with some of these games, but we don't see that happen.
Yeah, we'll see what they do with Miami. Not that it factors into the playoff race, but my goodness. So let's look back at last weekend because, I sat right here and said I want to see two games for sure. And that was Iowa, Wisconsin, and it was North Carolina, Miami, because I thought, and I picked Miami to win. I was kind of kicking myself pretty early in that game thinking I was never going to see that. No. But I did think, should have went with those receivers, and it wasn't with 62 points on the board what I would have said had to happen to get 62 on the board, that Sam Howell was going to throw for 450 and 6 touchdowns. They just freaking pounded them, just battered them.
Man, this was surprising. And I thought this was going to be a close game. I said over and over, it could go either way. Of course, even Vegas agreed. They only had a 3-point difference there between the two. I thought it would be a highly scoring game for both offenses. Based on the track record for North Carolina's defense tending to give up a lot of points to teams that have decent offenses. Man, I don't know. This is more than just a loss for Miami. This is bad news for the direction of the program, because we thought they were headed in the right direction, and maybe they are. They're still a young coaching staff, the whole thing, but this has been the MO for Miami. When you go back to a couple of years ago, or 2017, whenever they were ranked in the top 5 and they lost their last 3 games in embarrassing fashion, starting with Pitt, which was a close game. Then they get blown out by Clemson in the ACC championship. Then they get blown out by Wisconsin. This seems to be a recurring thing for them. And let's face it, they played 2 decent teams or good teams this year, and that was Clemson and North Carolina, and they got blown out by both of them. This is a problem. Now, on the other hand of that, you look at North Carolina and Mac Brown. This is what Miami has been wanting forever, for a coach to come in there and turn things around within the matter of a year or two. So you can tell the difference that coaching makes, and not only the coaching, the recruiting, and that's part of the coaching as well. North Carolina is clearly trending up in the ACC, and Miami they seem to be planing off. I don't know if they're regressing or progressing. They seem to be planing off.
This is the game, as I mentioned a number of times in our conversations, that I wanted to see this season, because I looked at the schedule and saw Clemson way up here. Miami's not going to compete with them. And then a bunch of top 50 teams like Virginia Tech and NC State, et cetera, that Miami should beat. Although they walked the line with most of them, 25-24 against Virginia Tech, down to the wire against NC State, who's a decent team and turned in a good season against a weak schedule. But I desperately wanted to see them play somebody, and North Carolina was that team, and they just got obliterated. It was like North Carolina got to a point in the game where it was like, we're running like 3 running plays, and that's all we're doing. And we're just shoving the ball down your throat. We are manning up and making you look. We are challenging your manhood. It wasn't like we ran a bunch of exotic plays and came out with this crazy scheme.
Especially since Miami's really claim to fame, has been their defense, and Manny Diaz is a defensive guy, and the defense was just all. I mean, I don't. What that was the most yards they've ever given up in the history of their program. That's unbelievable.
I want to get this statistic straight. It was something about the most yards that two running backs have gained together against a Power 5 team or something like that. Like five. One of them had between Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. Yeah, well, somebody was around 230 and the other around 310. Crazy.
And the other part, the problem is, if you're a Miami fan, that should worry you is the team gave up. Let's be real. North Carolina is not that much of a better team. They may be better than Miami. Clearly they are, but they're not that many points better, that many yards better than Miami. Miami gave up whenever the score got out of hand, they gave up. And that's a culture problem.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because everything else that both teams have performed during the season tells us that there's not that much of a difference between the two teams, or else we would see it in the other games that they play, and they play very like schedules. But when they stepped on the field and North Carolina hit them in the mouth, Miami had no response, both strategically or in terms of, yes, manning up and fighting for respectability. William Ward, thank you so much for the super chat contribution. Appreciate that. Love your content, Mark. Keep up the good work. So again, it's every Monday here with Pigskin Pete on College Football Coast to Coast, every Monday at noon Eastern time. Going to grab one other super chat, and then we'll dive into a few questions here and also get Pigskin's take on USC, UCLA, and LSU, Florida. Emmanuel, if South Carolina beats, if USC, South Carolina is not playing football these days. If USC beats Washington in the Pac-12 title game and gets into the college football playoff to face Notre Dame, that would be awesome. Please, football gods, make it happen. USC, Notre Dame. Yeah, from a brand standpoint, awesome game.
I don't think that will be a contest, Mark. So from a fan standpoint, well, first of all, in order for that to happen, Clemson has to lose, which I clearly don't want. But I don't see if that were to happen, it would be another first round blowout.
I'm going to go the take of, I'm going to split the difference and say USC's got a really good quarterback, tremendous wide receivers, great, probably top 3 to 4 units in the nation. Alabama's probably at another level, but USC's right there. And they've got individual crazy talented players on defense. You know what I see? I see Notre Dame versus North Carolina. When I see Notre Dame, USC, I see it's competitive. It's decent. USC's got the athletes to stay in there, but Notre Dame just a pound away, win by 2 scores. That's the type matchup I see.
I mean, again, I think, listen, credit to Southern Cal. They're undefeated. They've had some close calls against some questionable teams, but I just think Notre Dame is on a different level than Southern Cal this year. I don't think it'd be a contest, really.
I agree. But again, I liken that USC team to that North Carolina team, and I see something similar there. Although they wouldn't be playing Notre Dame on the road, they'd be playing at a neutral site.
Neutral field, right.
All right. Weilki, appreciate the super chat contribution. Any chance James Franklin to Auburn?
No.
I don't think so.
I don't even think they'll pursue him. The question is, who will they pursue? That's the $1 million question mark.
He has won in the SEC at Vanderbilt, of all places.
Yeah. I don't know. The usual suspects will definitely be the names that come up every time there's a coaching hire. Brent Venables, 2 guys from Clemson, Brent Venables, Tony Elliott, whether they would entertain the job or not. I think that's a good job. If you're just waiting for a good job, that's clearly one of the top 5 or 10 jobs in the entire country. I mean, I don't think anybody's debating that. A lot of people talking about Mario Cristobal at Oregon. Urban Meyer, although I don't think Urban Meyer is ready to come back yet. I think he said so much. His name's going to come up in every conversation. Not that he won't ever come back. I don't see him coming back in 2021.
And why would Urban Meyer, even though he would be the man for the job, obviously he's the best coach out there. It's pretty much Saban, Dabo, Urban Meyer at the top of the list. But why would he, when USC might be a possibility at some point? I know that Clay Helton has saved his job for the time being, and Texas, where he could go into those conferences and own them. he goes into the SEC West, and it's a bloodbath. You talk about a power struggle. You got Nick Saban and Urban Meyer in the same division, and we're not even talking about Auburn and Texas A&M and LSU. Whoo!
Wow. And I don't have anything to base this on. I think there's only 2 jobs that Urban Meyer would consider taking, and those would be Notre Dame because he said so in the past, and Southern Cal. And Southern Cal could be a place that he goes and wins immediately. It's certainly in the Pac-12. May take him a couple of 2-3 years to get on a winning level nationally, but I think within 1 or 2 seasons, they would be far and away the best team in the Pac-12, just based on recruiting alone.
Off the top of my head, Illich 721, doesn't Urban Meyer own Saban? Yes, he won the last matchup. They split 2 SEC championship games in 08 and 09, and I believe Saban won the other game. I think it's like 3-2 Urban Meyer. If that's owning, I don't believe it is. We had a question from our guy, David Greenshield, if I can find it here. I know he calls your show and mine on a regular basis. He was basically saying, it's not there. Anyway, he's commented a number of times. One of them was concerning Ohio State being 6-0. Oh, he was comparing Ohio State and Texas A&M, basically saying Ohio State at 6-0 with a top 10 win against Indiana, top 15 win against Northwestern. Isn't that a better resume than Texas A&M with a loss at 9-1 and who they've beaten? And I think it's a fair point.
4 greatest programs in the history of college football that is irrelevant to the 4 best programs in 2020.
Yeah, if we're having like this historic conversation, we can do that sometime in the off season. But if we're talking about the playoff, yeah, those are 2 different things.
I see what he's saying there for the name brand, but I want to see good football games, Mark.
Yeah,
we have seen maybe 2 or 3 out of how many first round playoff games be competitive.
Yeah, I think there's really been 2 in 6 years.
So this is again, we won't get into this debate. We'll be here all day, but this is my biggest gripe with the expansion of the playoffs is I don't want to see more of those type of games. But we know we already know where I stand on that and you stand on that. Maybe we'll have that conversation at a later date.
Yeah, we can dive in during the off season. We're dealing with a playoff right now. It appears as though Cincinnati will play a conference championship game against Tulsa. They were supposed to play them back to back, but can certainly prove in 1 week that they're better than Tulsa and need to in a resounding fashion.
I like this comment by Matthew Bros. Says Luke Fickell to Auburn. I think he's certainly a name that's going to come up on every coaching search. What kind of fit do you think that Luke Fickell would be at Auburn, Mark?
Yeah, I wondered about him as well. I will find the comment at some point. But anyway, there is something about, and this may show some type of background bias or something in my favor that shouldn't exist because there are coaches from the North that go to the SEC and succeed. But I think generally there's a culture transition that some guys can make and others can't make. And Luke Fickell is an Ohio guy, an Ohio State born and bred guy, played there, coached there, both as an assistant and a head coach, grew up under Urban Meyer as a coach, played there at a high level. So, and now is coaching in Cincinnati in the same state. So going to the SEC, I don't know. PJ Fleck was talked about at one point going to Auburn. And I don't know about a guy that's always been in the North and the Midwest and going to the SEC. We saw Brett Bielema, who was an Iowa player, Wisconsin coach growing up through the system under Barry Alvarez, had the head coaching job, just a Midwest guy through and through, went to Arkansas with generally mixed results that eventually failed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an interesting name that's going to come up again. The trend, it does seem to be towards offensive guys. So when guys' names like Brent Venables, and who's the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame? He's another one that's come up a lot. I can't remember that guy's name.
Clark.
Yeah. So guys like that seem to be going by the wayside, although it's all about look, the reason that Gus Malzahn got fired has a lot to do with recruiting. Here we are, 2 days away from the early signing period for the class of 2021, and Auburn's sitting there in the 40s. Now they only have 13 commits. They can move up, but they're not moving up 30 something spots. So they normally, I think they average in the top 10 every year, or certainly in the top 12. If you look at Gus Malzahn's recruiting classes over his tenure there, being in the 40s, somewhere in the lower to mid 40s, is not acceptable at Auburn. I think that has a lot to do with the reason he left. Now, I also think that he was fired because this has been in the pipeline. I think this was decided maybe even before the season started. Maybe they give him a last-ditch chance to see if he can maybe either beat Alabama or win the West. And, we saw how that worked out.
And then the other two games from the weekend, obviously, that had huge playoff implications. LSU pulling off the huge upset at the Swamp, 37-34. We had Shoegate, we had a missed kick, we had a made kick from distance, and we had fog, and we had drama, and it was a great game. And then we had Dan Mullen and his detractors coming out after the game.
Man, what a crazy night that was. And we were talking a minute ago about a possible culture problem at Miami, the way that they gave up on that game. I think the same could be said. Now, I'm not saying Florida gave up on the game. I mean, it was a competitive game, but you have to know. I mean, I'm not saying anything out of bounds at my mark. You have to know that when the game is on the line, on the last drive of the game, you can't throw a guy's cleat. I just don't see that happening at a place like Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson. I just don't see it happen. I mean, of course, a player can go rogue and do something crazy no matter who the coach is, but I think it's unlikely that happens. And that game situation, it'd be different if it happened in the first quarter. Right. But when the game is on the line and that's a red flag in itself. And then, of course, after the game is over, Mullen is asked about that bad penalty, and he sort of defends the guy, which was weird as well. Instead of saying, he shouldn't have done that, he should have known better. We'll work on, getting our guys to know the game situations better, blah, 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 whatever coach speak that he needs to say. But defending the guy for doing it, what message does that send to the rest of the team? You can go out there and make a bonehead move that costs us the game, and Dan Mullen will defend you for it.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that happen on the field that the coach cannot see. He cannot be watching 22 guys at the same time. So maybe technically he didn't see it because he said something like that. I didn't see it. He saw a lot of other things. I watched the clip, and there were like 3 detailed things right before that he commented on that he saw, but he didn't see that. But at that point, it's substantiated. It happened. So it happened. So then, yeah, he said something like, well, yeah, I guess that's a penalty.
Well, no, he doubled down on it yesterday after he'd clearly seen it.
Okay.
Yeah. So no change in his tune there. Anyway. Yeah, but interesting enough, that was one of the dominoes that had to fall to open up the door for teams like A&M and Cincinnati, the teams that are on the outside looking in. So let me ask you this, Mark, because this is the debate. If Florida wins, which is a very, very low percentage against Alabama and a massive upset, does Florida make it into the top 4 with 2 losses? I tend to think that a 2-loss SEC champ who just beat the number 1 team in the country would get in despite the loss to LSU.
The thing that makes it tricky is that Alabama still gets in.
Oh,
so
sure.
Then how does the team that just beat them, that won the conference, not get in?
I agree. Yeah, and again, the debate is we've never seen a 2-loss team get in. Well, we've never seen a 2-loss SEC champ. That's the difference.
This is going to be beautiful if it happens, because then you've got the Texas A&M argument that they made it in, we beat them, and we only have 1 loss, and they have 2 losses. So then A&M even has a gripe, and it's legit.
Right. I think they would get in. But of course, I don't think anybody is thinking that that's going to happen. I think this game will probably be over by halftime between Florida and Alabama.
Has your evaluation, though, and projection of this game swung a lot because of the LSU game?
No.
Okay.
I thought it was going to be one-sided before the game happened between Alabama and Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was more in that realm of this is going to be an entertaining game, but never like down to the wire kind of thing. More of a 45-30 game, something in that range.
Right. Anyway, listen, we see crazy things happen. I don't think that LSU is a better football team this year than Florida is. I think, some crazy things happened. LSU obviously had the right game plan. Florida didn't come through. And then throwing the shoe on top of that probably cost them the game.
Let's say this was LSU and Alabama's position this year. Let's say LSU was playing just as good as Alabama, and they're in the SEC championship game against Florida, not having just played the game last week. But the point I'm making is this is the kind of thing that you can see an upset possibly with the number one team playing this well, but not the number one team being Alabama. Nick Saban just doesn't let that historically happen to him.
Yeah, I don't see it. They are too well coached and too focused as a football team to let that happen.
Yeah, they are dialed in.
I mean, we're talking about a difference between Dan Mullen and Nick Saban. Come on now. There is no discussion there.
The argument I don't know that it would be an argument, start off as a discussion, but we won't go there. We were having quite the discussion the other night between Uncle Lou and myself concerning co-champions, because I think he's been put off about his Georgia Bulldogs being the co-champion in the SEC East. It was pretty funny. Yeah,
you have to take whatever you can get, Mark. So co-champions.
I hope I don't mispronounce your name, Ebrima John. Thank you so much for the super chat. Want to let everyone know that we certainly appreciate the contributions here, and it makes this show possible with Pigskin Peete every week. College football coast to coast every Monday at noon Eastern right here. What would need to happen in order for Georgia football to make the playoff? Are we talking about 2021? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, it's virtually impossible, but let's say that Iowa State loses to Oklahoma, Cincinnati loses to whoever they're playing this weekend, Indiana loses to whoever they're playing this weekend, Texas A&M loses to Tennessee, Ohio State loses to Northwestern, and Clemson loses to Notre Dame. So you'd have to have basically everybody ranked ahead of Georgia currently all lose outside of Notre Dame and Alabama. Then maybe, and still probably not.
Because if all that happens, and I'm trying to keep track of all that, Alabama's in, Notre Dame's in, and then maybe Northwestern has a claim over Georgia, but they would have to jump.
See, Brad Highwood says Oklahoma would jump in them because they'd be the Big 12 champs. And he might be right about that. Currently, Georgia's ranked several spots ahead of Oklahoma, though. So, but to answer your question, it's virtually impossible for that to happen.
That's the path, though. You just laid it out.
Yeah.
You just went down the rankings. They all have to lose, and they're fortunately, except for Alabama and, well, I guess the ACC and the SEC are the only two playing each other. But they can all lose to other teams. Yeah. Good stuff. All right. How are we doing on time? Let's focus on next weekend then.
Sure.
So we're pretty much dead set. I think you're a little bit stronger on the Alabama side than I am, but we're generally aligned that it's not going to be a game.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, if Florida comes out there offensively and plays lights out, I think that they can keep it maybe competitive for a half. At the end of the day, Alabama's too good. And, unless they just have a slip up and have a bad day, they've yet to really have one of those days other than maybe earlier in the season against Ole Miss defensively. But maybe you could get into a shootout, score fest type thing. But at the end of the day, at minimum, I think Alabama wins by at least 2 touchdowns, probably more.
Yeah, I will make my official pick, of course, later in the week. But yeah, I'm in that range too. 14 to 17 to 20 points, anything in there. Clemson, Notre Dame, of course, we've got an 11-point spread last I checked. So Vegas really likes Clemson to avenge its loss and is really putting a lot on neutral site. Trevor's back, defensive starters back.
The line opened up as an early line at 7.5, and within 2 days it was 10.5, and now it's at 11, you said? So
no, I'm talking about an old line. I don't know.
Yeah, well, yeah. So basically, it's gone up 3.5 points since the line opened in just a matter of a few days. So that tells you what the betting public believes is that Clemson is going to avenge this game. How much they win by, I don't know. I tend to agree. I think Clemson's going to win the game. Obviously, would anybody think that I would say anything different? Of course you wouldn't. But some of the key players that we're getting back are the main reason. Not necessarily Trevor Lawrence, although I think there is a difference, especially in leadership and the playbook too, opening up. DJ played great the first game. But it's hard to beat a team like Clemson twice in a row in one season. And this game will not be in South Bend in the comforts of their own home. This will be in Charlotte. So I expect it to be a good game, though. I'm not saying that Clemson's going to go out there and wipe the floor with Notre Dame because they got their starters back or anything by that nature. I think that Notre Dame is an elite team, certainly one of the 4 best teams in the country. No matter what happens in this game, I believe they belong in the playoffs. But I think that Clemson will win. Probably by a touchdown or so.
If Clemson wins 35-10, do you put Notre Dame in the playoff?
I think you have to. I mean, who are you going to put in ahead of them? I mean, instead of them, they'd be sitting there as
USC.
A one-loss team with a number 1 win earlier in the season, with their only loss being to the number 3 team in a championship game. And the question, again, that I beg to ask is, who are you going to put in that's better?
I would put, if it was a regular season with 12 games, everybody playing 12 and a 13th in the conference championship, USC, but with only 6 games played versus the 11, is it going to be up to 11, 10 that Notre Dame's got?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I still go Notre Dame.
Yeah. I think that they're a shoe-in. I've said this 100 times. The only way I see them getting left out is if there's some ridiculously one-sided score, like Clemson wins by 45 or 50 points. That's the only scenario where I see they say, maybe, style points weren't there. You lost badly, but 3 touchdowns, 2 touchdowns, something. I don't see them getting left out.
We've got 132 on the line. We appreciate everybody jumping on board here. Again, it's noon every Monday, Eastern time, noon Eastern time with Pigskin Peete, college football coast to coast. And we appreciate your contributions as well. Is there any chance that Ohio State loses this weekend?
Sure. Not a likely one, but yeah, there's a chance. I think it's more likely, if we're comparing some of these championship games that are perceived to be one-sided, I think it's more likely that Ohio State loses to Northwestern than Alabama loses to Florida. And that's not necessarily a shot at Ohio State. I think I'm giving more credit to Northwestern than most people are. Still don't think it's going to be. I think Ohio State wins pretty easily.
Ohio State's a 20-point favorite. I think that's a little heavy.
Do you?
Not that they couldn't win by 20.
That's about what I would have. If I was to set a Pigskin Peete betting line, I think I would put them right around 20. I think it's about right.
They played 2 years ago in the championship game, and I'm almost positive it was 45-24. And the two teams are pretty comparable.
Sure.
To what they were then.
See how Northwestern plays defensively? If they're able to create a couple of turnovers or something, they may be able to hang for 2 or 3 quarters, but Ohio State's offense is just so elite at every position, all the skill positions, the running back, obviously the quarterback, and they have 2 or 3 NFL wide receivers. And it's one thing to beat Maryland 43-0 or something. It's a whole different story to stop that Ohio State offense.
And Northwestern would certainly rather catch Ohio State late season, regular season game in the mud somewhere in Evanston, Illinois, rather than on a fast NFL track in an indoor stadium in Indianapolis. That's not their surface.
No. Good point.
USC had a great game against UCLA. It didn't really impress me in terms of dominance because they were taking on a UCLA team that's much improved, but still not that good. And they really needed to pull it out. We're down most of that game. Should have lost the game if UCLA was a bit smarter with some 4th down situations. And so USC, unimpressive, but they skate by. They beat UCLA 43-38. Now they've got Washington one of the stranger entries into a conference championship game we will ever see at 3-1.
Jeez. You know what? I give more credit to USC than most people will. I think not only are they undefeated, but UCLA is, I think, how many games have they had where they've lost by 3 to 5 points or so? I think the majority of their losses have been last possession games. So, UCLA could easily be a one-loss team going into this game.
They could be an undefeated team.
Yeah. If you want to really get technical about it, they might possibly actually be better than Southern Cal. So I think that those were two good teams. I don't think it was a letdown that Southern Cal let UCLA hang around or had this crazy comeback. I actually thought the game would be close from the beginning. The line was only about 3, and I think that was about accurate.
Yeah, certainly was. UCLA looked like they kicked the game-winning field goal, but USC came back and pulled it out.
Yeah.
Do you like that all these other games are being played this weekend? So we expected the Pac-12 and the Big Ten to be in the mix because they had to condense their season so much. They said, we're playing games on championship weekend. I thought that was kind of cool, but now the SEC has had to do the same thing just to get games in.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of, okay, these are our 5 conference championship games and we can really lock in, you got games all over the place. It's almost like a normal college football weekend.
Yeah, I actually like it. I like it. I wouldn't like it in a normal year. In other words, if we had a full 12-game schedule, I probably would prefer the standalone championship games like normal. But in 2020, where we've had so many games canceled or postponed, I think you owe it to the football players and to the fans to play as many games as you can. And some of these have bowl implications, and not necessarily will they make a bowl because everybody's eligible for a bowl, but what bowl they will go to. So I like it.
I haven't really come up with a format that I would love, but I would like something in this direction, something closer to what we see this season, but not just have the 5 games that we've had in the past for the conference championship games. And I guess I'm dispelling and discarding, and I shouldn't, the group of 5, because we got the Sun Belt and the MAC and all the other championship games. So we do have 10 games in a regular year. That's a pretty full weekend, but I kind of like this whole seeding process that the Pac-12 and the Big Ten went through. Now, it broke down in the Big Ten because actually they're making up rivalry games that weren't played, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Indiana, Purdue, and that totally broke down the seeding situation. Like Iowa's a 2 seed in the West. They're playing Michigan. They should be playing Indiana, but regardless, it's more football, and if there are bad championship games and you're sitting there and it's 41-10 in the third quarter, you can say, oh, I'll rather watch Minnesota, Wisconsin. It's tied in the fourth quarter.
Exactly.
So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I like it. I wish Texas A&M was playing somebody really tough this weekend.
Yeah.
That would be fascinating.
It would be.
That would be kind of cool.
I think it's better that they're playing instead of not playing, though. So.
Do you have any thoughts about the Arizona job? Talk about just a forgotten destination, Arizona football.
I don't have any thoughts about the Arizona job.
I have no idea who they're going to hire. I threw that at you thinking, what am I going to come back with? I don't know who they're looking at out there.
The problem with the Arizona job is it's not really a very attractive job right now. They may have to go the route of a South Carolina and just go grab a guy who's maybe never been a head coach before. I don't really know what you do in that situation, Mark. I mean, because I don't even think, in other words, some of these guys like Luke Fickell from the group of 5, I mean, they would pass on that in a minute because they can get a better one. I wouldn't even know where to begin with searching for that. Maybe the Louisiana coach or the Coastal Carolina coach. I mean, is Arizona a step up from Coastal Carolina? Sure it is. It's a Power 5 gig.
And they've won in the past. They've been decent. Yeah. Arizona's actually been a pretty respectable football school for most of the time, but now the weather's good, and it's a nice little paycheck. I'm sure they pay about $3 million a year. I would think that there's some guy and again, I'd really need to comb through it and look at the research, but some guy like in the Mountain West, or again, I tend to think a little geographically that guys typically stay in the region that they're familiar with the recruiting. They have high school ties. They're familiar. Their family likes it there. that sort of thing. So I would think that there's somebody on maybe a Mountain West team.
Ryan, I can't read this. I don't want to mispronounce this guy's name. Litchi 721 says, yeah, there you go. Brian Harton from Boise State. I guess that's a logical answer there.
But to your point, I don't know if that's a step up.
About to say, is that a better job than Boise State?
I don't know.
I'm sure it's probably a slightly better paycheck, but as far as a better job, I mean, a better program, I don't know about that.
I don't know. I think people have a lot more respect for Boise State.
Yeah, right.
All right. Who else is playing this weekend? Any other non-conference or not non-conference, but non-championship games? Does this Oklahoma-Iowa State game intrigue you? Because of all the hyper focus on the college football playoff, I feel bad for these championship games. There's usually one of them, and it's usually the Pac-12, sometimes the Big 12, but usually the Pac-12, where it's like, okay, Utah's playing Oregon on a Friday night and nobody really cares because it doesn't have playoff considerations. And that's kind of the case with the Big 12 this year.
It is kind of the case. Again, we went through some of the crazy scenarios that could happen. I mean, the door, I think, is still slightly open for either an Oklahoma or an Iowa State to get in the playoffs. They'd have to have a lot of help, but they're not 100% out of it. So, yeah, I mean, the game is intriguing anyway, because I think they are two top 10 caliber teams this season anyway. We've seen Oklahoma has got to be, if not the most improved team from the beginning of the season towards the end of the season. I mean, they were sitting there at 1-2 to start the season out, and of course they've run the table ever since. So, yeah, it's interesting to me. It's a top 10 matchup. I think we'll see Oklahoma probably in the top 10 tomorrow night. If not, maybe sitting there at 11. Which I think they were 11 last week, weren't they, Mark? So I think they'll move up a spot with the losses. With Miami losing, they'll drop below Oklahoma. And of course, with Florida losing, we'll see where they put them. So, yeah, top 10 matchup is always intriguing, no matter whether it's playoff implications or not. At least to me, it is.
And for me to evaluate these conference championship games and evaluate the conferences themselves, I don't have my typical reliance on the non-conference games, because I love to go back to those and say, okay, when we add up Oregon and USC and Oregon's in all these teams and what they did against the other conferences, then I can kind of better gauge how strong I think a conference is. Now we just do it on the eyeball test because that's all we've got. And we assume that the Pac-12 is still the worst and is down. And we kind of have this hierarchy, but it's really not based on anything conclusive this year. It's just based on what we believe it to be.
Sure. It's that way most years. And the coronavirus year made it even, it compounded the problem.
And we're probably right. It probably still is what it is. All right, college football coast to coast, 141 on the line. We appreciate everybody jumping on here. We want to invite you back here every Monday at noon Eastern time here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, with Pigskin Pete. All right, man. Let folks know what you got going on over there.
Same old song and dance, doing a ton of live streams and uploaded videos. And of course, my next show will be tomorrow, the Lunch Money Show, or over on Uncle Lou's streaming channel, Uncle Lou on YouTube at noon. We do that every Tuesday and Thursday. And then tomorrow night, I will be on my channel at 7 p.m. Going live for the college football ranking show.
Good stuff. All right. Lock it in here, and we'll be back with more content throughout the day. And let's see, the next live show will be tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern time. All right, everyone. Appreciate you guys jumping on board. Thanks for the contributions as well. We will see you next time.